The story began with a young boy standing over the mutilated body of his grandfather, who had been sliced in half before his eyes. In that moment, he felt no grief. Only later did the weight of regret settle in, as he realized he had failed to honor his grandfather properly. Memories surfaced. Moments of joy spent together, from gathering herbs in the forest to the pride in discovering a spirit-linked plant. His grandfather had praised the find, confident they could sell it for a high price. Another memory returned. The boy had stumbled upon a fox den containing only unborn pups. When questioned if he had harmed them, he had said no, fearing the pain it would cause the mother. His compassion had stirred something in his grandfather, who, deeply moved, made the boy swear never to reveal the truth of what he was. Years passed. The boy, now older and burdened by remorse, stood alone and shouted his sorrow to the skies. He could no longer keep that promise. With resolve, he picked up a scythe and set out to find the one who had murdered his grandfather. Some time later, in Jeongyang village, a carriage rolled through the center of town carrying prisoners. Curious and furious villagers gathered, hurling insults as they noticed a boy among the captives. At a nearby inn, a middle-aged man with no clear origin watched with interest while locals speculated about the boy's crimes. An informant labeled him the Scythe Demon, accusing him of slaying 50 people using only a scythe. The man, unfazed by the villagers' shock, considered the advantage of employing someone so easily discarded by society. When a rock flew from the crowd and struck the prisoner's side, the man caught a glimpse of the boy's face and instantly recognized him. He knew then that this boy, Jeong-un, was exactly who he needed. Inside Yeonmok jail, Jeong-un, known now as the Scythe Demon, sat in reflection. He had chased his grandfather's killer, though he lacked the martial training to confront him. Without strength, he had no hope for revenge. Just then, a strange scent drifted in, thick, unmistakable smoke from a sleep-inducing herb. He struggled to remain awake before falling into unconsciousness. A figure entered quietly and attempted to release him. As the restraints loosened, Jeong-un awakened, lashed out, and tried to escape. His effort failed as another presence caught him from behind. The stranger revealed himself as the man from the inn. He quickly subdued Jeong-un with a swift strike, forcing him to cough blood. At that moment, a second figure arrived. The new arrival addressed the man as Guard Gam and introduced himself as Gam's master. He bore a startling resemblance to Jeong-un. With a mocking tone, he pointed out the uncanny likeness between them. Fate had drawn one to power as a noble and left the other to rot as a criminal. Rather than execute him, the young noble offered a proposition. Jeong-un would assume his identity as the third son of the Mok family, Jeong-un Mok. In return, he would gain food, luxury, and status. However, before he could earn these rewards, he needed to prove his loyalty. A pill was placed before him, likely poisoned, and only upon completing a given task would the antidote be provided. Motivated by vengeance and the memory of his grandfather, Jeong-un accepted. The nobleman gave his approval, and Guard Gam removed the chains. Once freed, Jeong-un walked outside, dazed by the sudden turn of events. However, something within him shifted. Without hesitation, Jeong-un reached for the young noble and snapped his neck. The motion was swift, decisive. He turned to Gam, announcing the noble's death without remorse, then demanded to know what came next. The false heir was gone. Jeong-un had taken his place. A memory surged back into Jeong-un's mind. Before his arrest, he had ruthlessly butchered a crowd of terrified townspeople, gripping a severed head in one hand. Their screams and desperate pleas only deepened his twisted satisfaction. In that moment, he fully embraced the truth his grandfather had tried to bury. He did not kill out of necessity but out of pleasure. Realization hit him like a blow. This darkness was not a mask, it was who he truly was. As he stood, stunned by his own reflection, he sensed a presence nearby. A figure approached, face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. Only a long scar beneath the left eye was visible. The stranger paused, clearly unsettled by the sight of Jeong-un's blood-stained hand and eerie composure. That look confirmed something had shifted. A far more dangerous path had begun. Despite lacking formal martial training, Jeong-un faced the man's drawn sword. The stranger struck with lethal precision, yet Jeong-un survived. Seized by the throat, he found himself studied with cold fascination. The stranger could not understand how someone untrained had infiltrated their ranks. Declaring him too dangerous to live, he slashed Jeong-un, who collapsed in a pool of his own blood. Somehow, he survived again and was taken into custody. The murder of the impostor young master had opened the door to a second chance. Later, Gam, filled with rage, grabbed Jeong-un by the neck and demanded answers. Jeong-un, unshaken, explained that he had simply removed a potential threat. Gam froze, stunned by the clarity and indifference in his tone. He then asked if Jeong-un had ever considered being killed. Jeong-un replied that if that were true, he would already be dead. He guessed correctly that Gam felt no true loyalty toward the real young master. Disturbed by the boy's insight, Gam threw him to the ground and drew a knife. Jeong-un calmly pointed out that he had already swallowed a poison pill and that only Gam held the antidote. Killing him now would serve no purpose. Gam paused, then decided to spare him. From that moment, Jeong-un was given the identity of the Grand Yeonmok family's third young master, a carefully chosen impostor. Gam brought him to the manor under strict instructions. He was to avoid all contact with the actual family and take the neutralizing agent every 24 hours. Any delay would mean certain death from the poison. One misstep could cost him his life. Though bound by this control, Jeong-un viewed it as a rare opportunity. He had cheated death and stepped into a new life. Beneath the surface, a quiet resolve took shape. He would master martial arts, seek revenge for his grandfather's suffering, and track down the real killer. Whatever the cost, he had no intention of remaining a pawn forever. The following morning, Gam placed his disciple, Go-chan, in charge of monitoring Jeong-un. Although tasked with a serious responsibility, Go-chan treated it with arrogance. He dismissed Jeong-un as a mere pretender, relying on the poison in his system to ensure obedience. Gam, however, reminded him that Jeong-un had already proven difficult to manage, having killed the real young master. Despite his bravado, Go-chan feared disobeying direct orders. He stationed himself outside Jeong-un's quarters, determined to fulfill his duty. Inside the room, Jeong-un sat in silence, pondering the strange circumstances that led to his role. The idea of living as a substitute stirred more questions than answers. He began to suspect the manor was hiding secrets deeper than he had imagined. Noticing Go-chan's impatience and overconfidence, Jeong-un quietly slipped outside under the guise of needing fresh air. When Go-chan confronted him and attempted to drag him back, Jeong-un turned the tables. With precise timing, he flipped Go-chan using the same technique he had once endured from Gam. Imitating the pressure point technique he had seen only once, he struck. Go-chan's limbs went numb as his body seized up in helpless paralysis. After a brief struggle, Go-chan gasped out a warning. If Jeong-un failed to take the antidote in time, the poison would kill him. In response, Jeong-un bit his own finger and forced Go-chan to swallow a drop of his blood. From childhood, Jeong-un had studied toxicology and experimented with rare venoms. His blood now carried a potent blend of poisons that made the original neutralizers ineffective. Go-chan's life now depended entirely on him. Terrified, Go-chan quickly gave in to Jeong-un's demand for information. Jeong-un pressed him for details about the manor and its secrets, promising death by poison if the answers lacked substance. With no alternative, Go-chan complied. Elsewhere, the head of the Yeonmok family lay bedridden, suffering from an unknown illness that left the household in uncertainty. The manor's doctor struggled to diagnose the affliction, and without a declared successor, the family faced an impending power struggle. Tensions escalated further when Lord Indon-mok's first wife, Lady Sok, entered the master's chamber, suggesting they call a diviner to treat Lord Mok. The doctor, already frustrated, objected to the woman's decision, scoffing at superstition. Despite his protests, she asserted her authority and ordered all non-family members to leave the hall. She believed conventional medicine had failed and insisted that spiritual insight was the only remaining path. Meanwhile, Go-chan, still under Jeong-un's control, guided him through a concealed passage deep within the manor. Hidden corridors twisted through the estate's foundations, designed long ago to shield secrets from both allies and enemies. Their destination was the master's chamber, the very place where the dying lord resided. Jeong-un followed in silence, eyes fixed forward, his mind brimming with thoughts. This was no longer just a survival game. Every step he took inside this manor brought him closer to the heart of its tangled web. The truth behind the illness, the succession, and the real reason behind his role as a stand-in were now within reach. He would uncover it all, even if it meant becoming the threat everyone feared. Jeong-un uncovered a grim truth. Gam and the original third young master had orchestrated a brutal plan. Their intention was to let Jeong-un and the first son destroy each other, clearing the path for the original third son's return. The first son, Yeonmok, was known throughout the manor for his drunkenness, reckless violence, and insatiable greed. In contrast, the second son, Yeonmok, possessed a shrewd mind and a calculating nature. Neither seemed fit to lead, yet both played critical roles in the unfolding scheme. The plan became clear. Yongho would be lured to eliminate the stand-in, unaware that he was merely a pawn. Following that, the first and second sons would likely clash, eliminating each other and leaving the original third son to ascend without resistance. However, Jeong-un's unexpected act of killing the real third young master had altered everything. This single decision introduced a volatile element no one had foreseen. While guiding Jeong-un through the manor, Go-chan grew suspicious. He questioned why Jeong-un was so desperate to reach the master's chamber. Jeong-un calmly explained that the matter involved life and death. He then advised Go-chan to keep the encounter hidden from Gam, knowing full well that secrecy was his best defense. During this time, a diviner named Cheon Ma arrived to address the Lord's worsening illness. He requested complete access and insisted on conducting a binding ritual before the dark affliction grew irreversible. The First Lady approved, offering 300 silver coins in exchange for locating the Lord's seal and a secret tome. All outsiders were dismissed as preparations began. Outside the hall, the First Lady crossed paths with Yucheon, the fourth son born to a concubine she held in disdain. Jeong-un observed silently as Go-chan explained that Yucheon possessed remarkable lower body strength, a key foundation for internal martial arts. This insight made Jeong-un question his own potential. He wondered whether, with enough training, he could surpass Gam. Go-chan responded bluntly, mastering internal martial arts required years of disciplined effort, typically between 5 to 9 years. It was unlikely that Jeong-un could achieve such strength quickly enough. However, when Jeong-un voiced his prediction that the manor would soon abandon both of them, Go-chan's stunned reaction confirmed it. That moment shifted their relationship. Jeong-un extended a proposal for allegiance, offering Go-chan a role at his side. After a moment's hesitation, Go-chan accepted, and together they slipped away from the courtyard unnoticed. Meanwhile, inside the master's chamber, the ritual began. The atmosphere thickened as Cheon Ma chanted, attempting to expel the unseen malevolence afflicting Lord Mok. The Lord writhed in agony, his body resisting the diviner's incantations with unnatural force. The room darkened, shadows stretching unnaturally as the ritual intensified. Despite his experience, Cheon Ma quickly realized the force he faced exceeded anything he had encountered. The evil spirit retaliated with overwhelming power, hurling him across the room into the wall. In the chaos that followed, Jeong-un and Go-chan burst into the hall. The diviner, dazed and battered, struggled to his feet and demanded to know their identities. Jeong-un offered no reply. Without hesitation, he approached the weakened Lord Mok, kneeling in front of him in a silent gesture of respect. The diviner shouted urgently, ordering Jeong-un and Go-chan to leave the chamber without delay. He struggled to maintain control over the force that had bound Lord Mok, now under the influence of an evil spirit. At the mention of such a spirit, Go-chan immediately recognized the man's true profession. The diviner continued pleading with them to escape, warning that the situation could escalate beyond his ability to manage. Before either could react further, Lord Mok's body convulsed with violent spasms, then began to float above the floor. The diviner's eyes widened with dread as he confirmed the possession. He ordered Jeong-un and Go-chan to restrain the levitating master to prevent him from severing the ceremonial bindings. However, despite their attempts, Lord Mok broke free. His body snapped through the ritual seals and struck Go-chan hard, wounding him. Witnessing this, Jeong-un acted on instinct. He surged forward and severed the possessed lord's arm in a single, calculated strike, halting the surge of dark energy. The diviner quickly stabilized the wound with a chant, his tone faltering under the strain of the situation. Having failed in his initial task, the diviner prepared to flee, hoping to slip away without facing consequences. However, Jeong-un, anticipating betrayal, stopped him at sword point. Demanding answers, he asked who was behind the attempt on the master's life. Cornered, the diviner confessed. The First Lady had orchestrated the attack, seeking both the family seal and the secret martial tome to ensure her son's inheritance. Upon hearing the truth, Go-chan urged Jeong-un to preserve Lord Mok's life. He insisted that allowing Young-chan to become the family leader would spell ruin. Despite the urgency, Jeong-un made a different choice. He instructed the diviner to conduct a new ritual, one that would extract the seal's location before they decided anything further. Go-chan then left the room, since he wasn't supposed to hear the location of the Lord's seal and tome. The diviner, now visibly shaken, began the second ritual. He directed the demonic spirit into a specially prepared vessel, aiming to trick it into believing it had returned to Lord Mok's body. With the spirit momentarily distracted, the diviner commenced the extraction process. Through this ritual, he uncovered the location of both the seal and the secret tome, hidden behind the fourth stone door in the medical ward's basement. As the knowledge surfaced, the ritual became unstable. The spirit began to resist, pressing against the bindings with increased ferocity. The diviner, overwhelmed, conceived a desperate escape. He turned to Jeong-un and claimed that cutting one of the binding threads would allow the spirit to return briefly to the master's body and bring balance to the ritual. Trusting the instruction, Jeong-un severed the thread. Instantly, shadowy limbs emerged from the spirit vessel, wrapping around him. Countless undead hands gripped his body, dragging him into the ritual circle. Shock and pain surged through him as he struggled in vain. Across the room, the diviner watched with a twisted grin. His eyes gleamed with satisfaction, believing his plan had succeeded. The evil spirit radiated a murderous intent from the beginning, and by the time it broke free, Jeong-un had already been caught in its grip. The shaman, seeking to avoid responsibility, decided to place all blame on Jeong-un and claim the reward promised by the First Lady. He pressed a talisman onto Jeong-un's forehead to begin the ritual. Inside Jeong-un's body, the evil spirit stirred in fury. It sought to seize control over his consciousness and plunge him into delusion. As the possession deepened, Jeong-un found himself standing in a quiet forest. The scene felt familiar. It was the old watering hole he used to visit. He followed his usual routine, filling the wooden bucket and preparing to bring water back home to his grandfather. However, something felt wrong. The air grew tense as he spotted smoke curling through the trees in the direction of his home. Alarmed, he sprinted toward the source, shouting for his grandfather. Upon arrival, he fell to his knees in horror. His grandfather's body had already been cleaved in half. The stillness of death hung in the air. In that moment, Jeong-un finally understood the depth of his grandfather's purpose and sacrifice. Sadly, the realization had come too late. Behind him, the spirit loomed, observing the memory with quiet satisfaction. It trapped him within the scene, feeding on his despair, and began to push further into his mind, hoping to consume him entirely. However, a voice interrupted the illusion. It was his grandfather, speaking calmly and gently. Jeong-un snapped out of the trance and looked around in disbelief. Warm tears welled in his eyes as he embraced his grandfather, holding on as though he would never let go again. A flicker of joy crossed his face, though the spirit, watching from the shadows, grew impatient. The spirit inched closer, hoping to resume the possession. Jeong-un turned and asked his grandfather about the meaning of his name. As the spirit approached, Jeong-un stared directly into its face. The intensity of his gaze startled even the evil presence. Reaching forward, he gripped the spirit tightly. He calmly told it that he was irritated it had used his grandfather's image so cruelly. The spirit recoiled, stunned that Jeong-un could even see it. Jeong-un stated that, if this illusion had been his own creation, it should have focused on him avenging his grandfather's murder. The spirit hesitated, sensing something unnatural within Jeong-un. Deep inside him, there was a sealed force, a concentration of pure killing intent, a desire so potent that even the spirit trembled. This was not a force a normal human could carry. His grandfather answered his earlier question with a gentle smile. He explained that Jeong-un was different from others, which was why his name bore the character for righteousness. As those words were spoken, his figure began to fade slowly from the illusion. Panicked, the spirit tore itself free from Jeong-un's grasp and fled into the deepest recesses of his mind. It found itself surrounded by a calm, flower-filled landscape. In the middle stood a sealed door. The spirit recognized it immediately. Behind that door lay all of Jeong-un's repressed memories. Driven by curiosity and fear, the spirit attempted to unlock it. Before it could make contact, Jeong-un reappeared behind it. With a calm expression, he pulled the spirit back and swallowed it whole. Back in the physical world, the shaman turned in confusion. He could not comprehend what had just happened. Jeong-un had subdued the demonic spirit entirely. He gave it a name, calling it the demonic sage. Inside the inner residence, Myung-in paced restlessly, his thoughts consumed by worry for Lord Mok. 19 years earlier, he had fought alongside Lord Mok to suppress the pirate uprising. After their victory, Myung-in pledged his loyalty to Lord Mok and joined the Mok family as an inner hall master. Recently, the First Lady had struck a secret arrangement with him, convincing him to allow a shaman into the manor. Her goal was to uncover the location of a hidden secret tome and the family seal, which she believed would elevate her son's standing. Although he agreed to the request, Myung-in harbored suspicions. He believed the shaman lacked integrity and intended to manipulate the manor lord to seize the artifacts. Eventually, curiosity overtook him. He decided to check on Lord Mok personally. Inside the main hall, the shaman realized the spirit haunting the lord was not an ordinary presence. This was a high-class evil spirit, one far beyond his control. Jeong-un, sensing the danger, ordered the spirit to destroy the shaman. The spirit responded instantly, rushing forward with overwhelming force. The shaman raised barriers through his craft, attempting to defend himself, yet fear crept across his face. Even he was stunned that Jeong-un, a boy, could command such a being. The spirit smirked and unleashed a powerful wave of energy, hurling the shaman across the room. Dark, clawed hands emerged from the spirit's form and gripped the shaman tightly. Desperate, the shaman begged Jeong-un for release. Jeong-un refused. The shaman offered an apology, suggesting it was due to betrayal. However, Jeong-un explained it was because the shaman had uncovered the locations of the secret tome and the seal. From the beginning, Jeong-un had intended for this outcome. Soon after, Go-chan entered and was shocked by the scene before him. The shaman's twisted body lay lifeless. Jeong-un calmly instructed him to move the corpse. Taking a sword, Jeong-un then swung it around the chamber, creating marks of a struggle. His plan was simple. Claim the shaman had gone mad and attacked the manor lord, cutting off his arms before Jeong-un and Go-chan arrived to intervene. Go-chan objected, explaining that such a tale would only stir suspicion. Jeong-un responded without words. He stabbed himself in the leg, reasoning that it would support the idea that the shaman also tried to harm the young master. Go-chan, stunned, could no longer describe him as merely frightening. The word no longer fits. What stood before him was something far more chilling. At that moment, Myung-in entered. His eyes widened at the chaos that filled the room. Instantly, he assumed Jeong-un and Go-chan had caused the destruction. Go-chan rushed to clarify, stating it was a misunderstanding. Jeong-un tried to rise and explain but collapsed. Myung-in turned to Go-chan, demanding a proper account. As Go-chan looked at Jeong-un, he noticed the faintest smile on his face. It became clear that everything had been part of Jeong-un's performance. Later, as a result of this act, Jeong-un was moved to the medicinal hall. Conveniently, this location was near the rumored resting place of the secret tome and seal. He quietly prepared to investigate during the night. That evening, Go-chan visited and handed over a stack of books once owned by the shaman. He had managed to retrieve them moments before the manor guards burned the rest to erase evidence. Curious, Go-chan asked why Jeong-un cared so deeply about those texts. Instead of answering, Jeong-un told him to look outside. Go-chan glanced through the window and saw nothing unusual. However, an unseen spirit lingered silently beyond the frame. Shortly afterward, the First Lady entered the medicinal hall, demanding a word with Jeong-un. Go-chan welcomed the First Lady into the medicinal hall. Jeong-un immediately recognized her as the First Lady of the Mok family. Even the guards, including Gam, had identified her as the most dangerous figure within the household. Her background from a martial clan and mastery in combat made her formidable. Alongside her martial prowess, she possessed a sharp intellect. Although Jeong-un acknowledged her presence, he remained lying on the bed. Observing this, Go-chan quietly noted that Jeong-un's performance had exceeded his expectations. Without hesitation, the First Lady struck Jeong-un directly on his wounded leg. Her guard raised her sword to deter Go-chan from interfering. The First Lady quickly deduced that Jeong-un was the true cause of the recent events. She leaned closer and whispered that she would not be deceived as easily as Master Myung-in had been. Her tone grew colder as she explained that no competent shaman would ever be possessed during a ritual. With fury, she slapped Jeong-un and demanded an explanation for what had transpired in the main hall. In response, Jeong-un remained composed and invoked the presence of the demonic mage. The spirit appeared and instantly subdued the First Lady's guard. She recognized the overwhelming power. It resembled the same dark force that had overwhelmed the shaman earlier. When Jeong-un mentioned the secret tome and the family seal, tension filled the room. The guard, caught in the mage's grasp, gasped under the force of spiritual pressure. Rather than threaten her further, Jeong-un proposed a negotiation. He clarified that he had no interest in becoming the head of the family, yet he could influence the future of the clan. Either the second son or even the lowly fourth son could benefit from his decision. He advised the First Lady to reconsider her stance and begin treating him with the respect he now commanded. Later, inside Lady Suk's quarters, the First Lady was overcome with rage. She hurled objects across the room as her anger flared. She felt humiliated after being outwitted so thoroughly by Jeong-un. All her carefully laid plans had been unraveled. She admitted to herself that her failure stemmed from underestimating him. Ever since the death of Jeong-un's mother, her side had begun losing power, and now she feared the boy had been concealing his true self all along. Her guard suggested eliminating Jeong-un before he could cause more trouble. However, the First Lady rejected the idea. Killing him outright would draw suspicion, especially so soon after the disruption in the medicinal hall. Instead, she devised a new plan. She decided to contact the Ghost Shadows, an elusive faction known for their deadly skills and ties to the same sect from which the shaman had originated. By informing them of the shaman's death, she expected them to exact revenge on her behalf. Meanwhile, at midnight, Jeong-un sat alone in the medicinal hall reading one of the shaman's salvaged books. The pages detailed the transformation of the dead into vengeful spirits, explaining that such entities were born from deep resentment. The strength of each spirit depended on several variables, including the nature of their death and the energy surrounding them. According to the text, there were 3 common types of spirits. The red spirit remained bound to a specific location, often inducing chills or unease. The second type could afflict the human body, causing fatigue or prolonged illness. The third and most dangerous was the yellow spirit, capable of directly ending the life of its host. As Jeong-un studied further, the demonic mage appeared, announcing that he had found the correct area. Jeong-un silently observed the spirit and confirmed his suspicion that the mage was a yellow spirit. As he prepared to search for the secret tome and the seal, he reflected on recent discoveries. He had realized that the demonic mage's abilities had not affected the First Lady. Fortunately, they had worked on her maid. This indicated that first-rate martial artists, such as Gam, were resistant to spirit control. However, the same resistance was not present in Go-chan. Given this, Jeong-un began to set his sights on a greater objective. He needed to locate a green spirit, classified as 4th tier. These beings had existed for decades, developed the power to control their environments, and created powerful illusions. They were regarded as extremely dangerous and required immediate exorcism once encountered. With his mind focused and his destination clear, Jeong-un quietly set out. His next move would bring him closer to uncovering the location of the secret tome and the seal, both of which remained hidden within the shadows of the Mok family. Jeong-un moved steadily down the narrow steps, descending deeper into the hidden parts of the Mok family estate. The journey underground confirmed what he had already suspected: the secret tome had to be of immense importance if it had been buried this far beneath the manor. His thoughts shifted to Gam, the elite guard. Since the demonic mage's influence would have no effect on him, he needed more leverage if he wished to confront her successfully. Eventually, a single door appeared before him. Upon entry, he discovered a small chamber that branched into 4 separate doorways. According to the information extracted from Lord Mok's corrupted spirit, the contents he sought were hidden behind the 4th door. Jeong-un advanced through the passageway, which stretched further than expected. While walking, he accidentally stepped on a protruding stone. A mechanism triggered, releasing a massive rock from above. Reacting quickly, he leapt aside only to land on another trap. A barrage of arrows shot toward him, which he managed to deflect using the lantern he carried. As he regained balance, a heavy trunk was released in his direction. He barely dodged it, rolling away across the rough stone floor. The excessive number of traps made him question the true purpose of this place. He began to suspect that the site held more than just a secret tome. Driven by curiosity, he pressed on, eager to uncover the truth. Finally, he arrived at a chamber that appeared different from the rest. Unlike the stone tunnels behind him, this space was structured entirely from wood, with geometric precision. At its center stood a lone table holding a wooden box. Upon opening it, Jeong-un found 2 aged books nestled inside. According to Go-chan, one contained sword techniques while the other held a cultivation method. Jeong-un collected both, yet an odd sensation crept over him. Something in the room felt misplaced. His eyes scanned the surroundings until they rested on a second, much larger wooden box set against the wall. The chest looked heavy and inactive, though traces on the floor showed it had been dragged to its current position. Driven by instinct, he pushed the box aside and discovered multiple seals etched into the floor. Removing each seal carefully, he found another wooden container hidden beneath. This chest emanated a deeply unsettling aura. When he lifted the lid, he was met with a sight that made him pause. Inside was a book, not of paper or silk, but bound in human skin. Beads and talismans wrapped around its cover, pulsing faintly in the dim light. As soon as he touched it, the lantern in his hand flickered and extinguished, leaving the room in a chilling silence. Above ground, just outside the medicinal hall, Yeonpyeong gathered with his loyal subordinates. A celebration was underway. He spoke with growing confidence about his plans to take control of the Mok family, now that Guard Gam had officially aligned with his cause. His words carried certainty, as if the role of clanhead had already been claimed. At that moment, Gam arrived and offered his greetings. Yeonpyeong organized a modest welcome gathering for Guard Gam. Although he had originally planned a lavish feast, the deteriorating health of Lord Mok forced him to scale down the celebration. Nonetheless, Guard Gam felt honored by the gesture and accepted the recognition with humility. Soon after, Yeonpyeong received news that Jeong-un had lost his ability to use martial arts. Guard Gam thought to himself that the real Jeong-un had already died, and the person now bearing his name was an impostor unfamiliar with combat techniques. Despite knowing the truth, Guard Gam chose not to reveal the third master's death. If the truth became public, it would expose his failure in protecting Lord Mok's son and place his own life at risk. In order to eliminate this loose end and secure his loyalty to Yeonpyeong, Guard Gam considered presenting Jeong-un's severed head as proof of devotion. This revelation pleased Yeonpyeong. He expressed gratitude that someone of Guard Gam's skill and reputation now supported his ambitions. The loss of Jeong-un's martial abilities was seen as a stroke of fortune. Although curious about how Jeong-un had lost his skills, Yeonpyeong accepted Guard Gam's vague response. The guard claimed he could not reveal the reason at that moment but assured Yeonpyeong that there was no cause for concern. Yeonpyeong trusted him, aware of his past as a lethal assassin from a notorious organization. However, despite the trust he displayed outwardly, Yeonpyeong still harbored doubts. He dismissed Guard Gam for the time being, telling him to return only if the matter was urgent. Afterward, Yeonpyeong instructed his own men to keep a close watch on Guard Gam. In secret, he ordered a subordinate named Ilsing to visit Jeong-un and determine whether he truly had lost his martial prowess. To make the test more entertaining, Yeonpyeong directed Ilsing to break Jeong-un's ankle. Meanwhile, beneath the medicinal hall, Jeong-un stood before a strange object. His fingers rested on a relic that pulsed with a rhythm closer to death than life. The air around it felt heavy, and he could not understand why such a dangerous thing had been hidden beneath the estate. His curiosity tempted him to undo the rosary wrapping it, eager to inspect the artifact further. Before he could act, the demonic mage materialized. Its presence alone revealed the object's importance. Even the spirit seemed disturbed, trembling as its gaze fixed on the book resting nearby. Jeong-un recognized the magnitude of what he had found. If a being like the demonic mage bowed before it, then it surely held exceptional power. His thoughts then turned outward. The appearance of the demonic mage often meant someone was lurking nearby. Ilsing, the spy dispatched by Yeonpyeong, had approached the medicinal hall. Although his task was to assess Jeong-un's strength, he found Go Chan stationed outside, guarding the entrance rather than the young master himself. Taking advantage of the distraction, Ilsing crept toward the building. From outside, he peeked through the window and saw Jeong-un sleeping peacefully. Nothing about the scene seemed suspicious. Slipping silently through the window, he entered the room and approached the table. There, he discovered a manual. The moment he recognized its content, his eyes widened. In the hands of Yeonpyeong, such knowledge could tip the balance of power in his favor. Just as Ilsing reached for the book, Jeong-un emerged from the shadows behind him. Without hesitation, he seized the intruder's head and slammed it forcefully onto the table. He asked if the man was feeling sleepy, then continued smashing his head against the wood. Blow after blow echoed through the chamber until the guard lost consciousness. Later, Ilsing awoke to find himself hanging upside down beneath the medicinal hall. Ropes dug into his ankles, and the world spun around him. Jeong-un stood nearby, prepared to begin the interrogation. Before Jeong-un could take the captured guard underground, Go Chan arrived at the medicinal hall. He informed Jeong-un that the man's name was Jo Ilsing, a personal escort of Yeonpyeong. From the manner in which Jo Ilsing had infiltrated the area, it was clear that his intentions were far from innocent. Jeong-un lifted the unconscious man and carried him to the hidden basement to begin the interrogation. Go Chan pleaded with him to spare the guard, explaining that Yeonpyeong held deep affection for his subordinates. Any harm done to one of them would likely ignite the second master's fury. Despite Go Chan's repeated requests, Jeong-un continued without hesitation. Deep beneath the medicinal hall, Jo Il-sung regained consciousness. His first request was for release. Jeong-un demanded a reason. Jo Il-sung claimed that he was close to Yeonpyeong and warned that Jeong-un would bring danger upon himself if he continued. He offered to speak well of Jeong-un to the second master, suggesting leniency could be granted if he cooperated. Jo Il-sung believed Jeong-un would be frightened by Yeonpyeong's influence, but he failed to understand who he was dealing with. Jeong-un was no saint who forgave easily. He was a man shaped by darker resolve. Intrigued by Jo Il-sung's claim about Yeonpyeong's affection for his men, Jeong-un appeared to consider the offer. He stood, stepped forward, and untied the ropes binding the guard. However, when Jo Il-sung looked down, he noticed one of his fingers was missing. He could not feel the loss, nor could he move properly. Jeong-un calmly explained the cause. A rare herbal mixture derived from plants within the medicinal hall had been used to create a poison that numbed the body. Jo Il-sung would feel nothing for several hours. Jeong-un began the interrogation, declaring that for every second of silence, one of Jo Il-sung's fingers would be removed. The first question was simple: why did Yeonpyeong send him? Time passed with no answer. Jeong-un removed one finger, then another. Jo Il-sung cursed him, yet still withheld the truth. Jeong-un remained unmoved. In total, 4 fingers were cut off before the guard broke. With blood trailing down his arm, Jo Il-sung confessed. Yeonpyeong had ordered him to confirm whether Jeong-un had truly lost his martial abilities. Reflecting on the confession, Jeong-un quickly deduced that Guard Gam had changed allegiances. The speed of betrayal was notable, but not surprising. When asked if Guard Gam had a hand in the scheme, Jo Il-sung nodded in confirmation. Jeong-un admired the tactic. For someone like Guard Gam, who had once served him, such cunning was expected. Jo Il-sung, shocked by how fast Jeong-un uncovered the betrayal, began to doubt whether the young man had ever trusted Guard Gam. Jeong-un asked no further questions. Instead, he stood silently, contemplating what to do next. Realizing his life was nearing its end, Jo Il-sung pleaded for mercy. He offered full loyalty to Jeong-un and promised to serve him faithfully. He claimed he had never expected such brilliance and was now willing to do anything. Sensing a chance to prove his worth, he begged for a task. Jeong-un accepted the offer. He declared that there was indeed one task. The price would be Jo Il-sung's life. Without hesitation, Jeong-un slit the man's throat. Blood spilled freely onto the floor. He collected the blood and poured it over the wooden book he had discovered earlier. After studying the cursed tome, Jeong-un understood its nature. The seal guarding it was formed of pure energy. According to what he had read in one of the shaman's manuals, such purity could only be weakened by corrupt energy. A tragic death, especially one filled with regret, carried the kind of impurity the book required. Placing the bloodied corpse above the tome, he allowed the blood to flow over the cover. The pages soaked in the crimson pool, and the spell began to respond. The seal, once hidden, now released its grip. Jeong-un stepped back, observing the transformation. Blood overflowed, spreading across the floor. A low hum of power filled the chamber as the liquid began to rise. It swirled violently before condensing into a shape. A surge of energy blinded him. Silence fell over the space. When Jeong-un opened his eyes, he found himself in an unfamiliar world. Blood covered the land in every direction. Amid the scarlet haze, a woman emerged from the stillness and stepped toward him. Jeong-un stood in stunned silence. What lay before him was not the power of a 4th-level spirit as he had anticipated. It was something far greater. The presence radiated the unmistakable aura of a 5th-level spirit. According to the book he had studied, these were called blue spirits, entities that had existed for over a century. Though he had expected the possibility of encountering a higher-ranked spirit, the magnitude of this one's energy surpassed his expectations. For a moment, he regarded the situation as a twisted form of gratitude. Yet, in that instant, he felt his knees buckle under the pressure of the spirit's strength. The blue spirit declared its demand, calling for Jeong-un to offer his soul. He already understood that exorcising or subduing a spirit of this level required the combined strength of at least 10 master shamans. Despite the intensity of the pressure, Jeong-un slowly forced himself back to his feet. He refused the demand. Although shaken, he remained firm. He began to speak, recounting what he had learned about spirits from the texts he had read. The key to every spirit's existence, he said, was the need for a vessel. Without a body to possess, a spirit's power was severely limited. The blue spirit listened, visibly annoyed by the clarity and accuracy of his explanation. Determined to provoke her, Jeong-un challenged the spirit to take his body by force if she was able. Her response was immediate. A searing blast of blood energy shot toward him, slamming into his body and sending him crashing to the ground. Blood spilled, and the flesh on his face tore from the force of the impact. Before he could recover, another strike followed. This time, the spirit warned him to stay down and submit. Although severely wounded, Jeong-un remained conscious. The blue spirit noted his resilience and decided to present him with an offer. If he submitted his soul willingly, she would grant him one wish. Jeong-un narrowed his eyes, questioning the reason behind such an offer. She explained that it was an acknowledgement of his willpower. If she damaged his body too much, it would become useless as a vessel, making the possession fruitless. When he asked what would happen if he refused, she met him with a cold stare. She would kill him without hesitation and seek another soul to inhabit. Jeong-un lowered his gaze for a moment and muttered that there was indeed a desire in his heart. The spirit's tone shifted slightly as she pressed him to reveal it. She guessed it might involve betrayal or perhaps the death of a loved one. She even promised to rip the soul of such a person from existence if that was his wish. Jeong-un, however, responded without hesitation. His desire was simple. He wanted her to be quiet and obediently serve him. The spirit clenched her jaw in rage. Her composure cracked, and she summoned every drop of blood that had saturated the space. The red current surged toward Jeong-un with crushing force. She declared that his flesh and bones would be shredded until his body became suitable for possession. His limbs refused to move, and consciousness slipped away. Yet even as his body collapsed, his senses remained active. The taste of blood filled his mouth. It was richer than any he had tasted before, more vivid than the deepest carnelian cherry. The metallic flavor was familiar, but unlike the blood he had once known as the Scythe Demon. Back then, blood had warmth. It had trembled with life, vibrating with heat and breath. What he tasted now was the opposite. It was cold, it was death. At that moment, realization struck him. Everything he had seen was an illusion. The crimson world around him fractured. Cracks spread across the bloody landscape until it crumbled into nothing. The spirit reeled in disbelief. She had been deceived. Her power faltered, and a force erupted from Jeong-un that pushed her backward. The illusion shattered, leaving only silence in its wake. The blue spirit formed a butterfly from blood and directed it toward Jeong-un. Despite the attack, it caused only minimal damage. As she observed the surroundings, the spirit realized they were now within the realm of transcendence. This realm, known for allowing individuals to escape illusions by severing all five senses, was incredibly difficult to access. Even first-rate shamans rarely succeeded in fully entering it. However, Jeong-un, who was not even trained as a shaman, had reached this state. The only possible explanation was that Jeong-un possessed the natural qualities of a master shaman. His innate resilience had pushed him into this elevated realm. As he laughed openly at the spirit, irritation overtook her expression. She warned him that escaping an illusion did not guarantee control of the situation. Jeong-un responded with a new plan. He presented the spirit with the very book he had acquired after defeating the shaman in the main building. This gesture immediately enraged her. According to that book, older spirits often remain tied to the physical realm through a vessel. In her case, the vessel binding her was none other than the book itself, crafted from human skin. With a fierce grin, Jeong bit into the book and tore it with his teeth. The spirit howled in pain. Her fury deepened as she failed to comprehend how he could damage an object infused with demonic energy. First-rate shamans had previously struggled to seal that very book, enduring repeated failures. Jeong, however, had managed to injure it with nothing more than his teeth. The spirit, now overwhelmed with rage, seized him by the throat and slammed him backward. She declared that she no longer needed his body. Despite the pressure on his neck, Jeong managed a faint laugh. He reminded her that if she could have taken the book, she would have done so already. Her failure to act confirmed that she was incapable of touching it. Though his body was racked with pain, Jeong continued to chew the piece he had bitten off. He noticed that his blood had begun to circulate in reverse, a sensation he recognized from the first time he consumed a poisonous herb. This time, however, the disturbance carried something else. A soul's fury surged within him. Its hatred was directed not at Jeong, but at a much greater force. A desire for revenge gripped the remnants of that soul. Ignoring the spirit's screams, Jeong swallowed the piece of human skin. She tightened her grip around his throat, desperate to stop him, but it was too late. Her fury erupted. Suddenly, the world around him shifted once again. He found himself in an unfamiliar place. A vast ocean of corpses stretched into the distance. At the center stood a kneeling figure. The blue spirit now appeared as a mortal woman, bound to a sword with a cloth, facing a throne. She spoke to the figure seated upon it, though her words were inaudible. Her rage, however, was unmistakable. She charged forward, attempting to strike the figure who resembled a king. The monarch responded effortlessly, piercing her chest and discarding her body like waste. Several masters appeared behind the throne. Each one rushed toward her with drawn knives. Together, they stabbed her repeatedly until her body lay still. As Jeong-un returned to the present, a voice rang out. A red thread emerged from his chest, its other end connected to the blue spirit. The bond had formed. She was no longer an enemy. She had become a servant spirit, bound to Jeong-un. A sense of satisfaction settled over him. He had gained control over a fifth-level spirit, a blue spirit that now answered to him. The blue spirit grabbed Jeong-un's neck once more. However, now that she had become a servant spirit, the pain coursing through his body also reached her. She quickly released him, coughing from the shared torment, then turned away in frustration. Jeong-un realized that if the spirit was affected by his pain, there was a strong possibility that the demonic mage had also felt something earlier, especially considering he had narrowly escaped death. Meanwhile, the demonic mage's condition seemed far worse, almost as if his existence had been wiped out. Jeong-un glanced at the spirit and remarked that they should introduce themselves since they would be bound together from now on. He stepped forward and presented himself as Mok Gyeong-un. He asked for her name, hoping to refer to her properly, yet she offered no reply. Left with no choice, Jeong-un decided to give her a name of his choosing and called her Red Dung Beetle. The name visibly annoyed her. Sensing her reaction, Jeong-un guessed she disliked it and asked again for her real name. The spirit, however, declared that she would never share her name with a mere mortal. Since she offered nothing, Jeong-un gave her another name. This time, he called her Blue, referencing her status as a blue spirit. She made no protest, simply sitting in silence, and appeared to accept it. Jeong-un decided to stick with that. He noted her pride and concluded he could not force her into obedience. He would have to win her favor through patience and persuasion. Turning to the book made of human skin, Jeong-un asked Blue about its origin. She dismissed the question, claimed she knew of no such spirit, and walked off, saying she had other matters to attend to. Jeong-un noticed something peculiar. The book's text was written in blood. He found the combination of human leather and blood-written script morbidly fascinating. However, the symbols made no sense to him. He could not understand their meaning. Blue observed his struggle and chuckled, which only irritated Jeong-un further. He returned his focus to the book, determined to decipher the symbols. After careful study, he managed to make out a chant. He read aloud, advising not to despair but to rely on the mind of another form. Before nothingness, there must have been form. What seems to be may not actually be. As Jeong-un continued reading, the surrounding chi began to stir and flow toward him. He recited again that the demon obstructs the way of the good, yet the ultimate blood holds power to reverse all. Suddenly, the book attached itself to his palm, refusing to let go. Blue was stunned by what he had done and questioned whether the book was responsible for what followed. Jeong-un's veins tightened painfully, sending waves of agony through his body. Blue also began to suffer and immediately instructed him to stop breathing, clear his mind, and think of nothing. Jeong-un obeyed without hesitation. Gradually, the pressure eased, his veins loosened, and the book fell from his hand. Blue was amazed by how quickly he managed to control himself. The ritual of attachment had been undone. She stared in disbelief. Jeong-un, who had no formal training in martial arts, had survived a ritual that even experienced shamans struggled with. It seemed miraculous. He, however, remained unaware of the full extent of what he had accomplished. Sitting calmly, he simply enjoyed the feeling of relief. Blue finally broke her silence, explaining that the ritual had nearly gone wrong because Jeong-un had not controlled it properly. His breathing technique had also been flawed. Jeong-un smiled, pleased that Blue had finally begun to speak. She responded that she was only acting in self-interest, given how dangerously foolish he had been. Curious, Jeong-un asked about the ritual of attachment. Blue described it as a method to pull things toward oneself and bind them. It involved bending the nature of energy to one's will. Jeong-un clutched his stomach, feeling sharp pain. Blue clarified that his chi had been twisted because he was pulling from nothing after severing the connection to the book. This caused his inner flow to collapse. She advised him to practice using the ritual on the guard's corpse instead. She instructed him to focus on the guard's energy core. Since the guard was dead, his chi would have dispersed and could be pulled back gradually. Jeong-un admitted he knew nothing about energy cores or the related principles. He requested that Blue explain everything. She prepared him to begin. As instructed, Jeong-un placed his palm beneath the guard's navel and started the chant. Slowly, he began absorbing chi. A warm current of energy flowed into him, circling his core. Blue told him to draw something from it and make it stick. He concentrated as the chi's flow intensified. This, Blue explained, was the true essence of the ritual of attachment. For the first time, Jeong-un felt what true Kai was like. A warm current of energy wrapped around his torso, confirming what Go-chan had described earlier. According to Go-chan, gathering chi naturally took time. However, absorbing another person's inner energy accelerated the process, making it possible to grow stronger quickly. Jeong-un, who possessed the mind of an anti-protagonist, accepted this logic without hesitation. Killing for power did not seem far-fetched. Suddenly, all the energy he had gathered dispersed. Blue explained that chi required a specialized method for storage. Without it, the energy would vanish. Jeong-un needed a unique internal trait to store absorbed Kai separately from other energies. In essence, the ritual of attachment alone could not store Kai. Jeong-un felt disappointed. He had believed he had found a shortcut to strength. Blue reminded him that mastering martial arts was never easy. However, the ritual of attachment was only the first among the 8 techniques known as the thought-shattering methods. Mastering just one could lead to endless potential. Blue encouraged him to focus the remaining Kai into his hand through circulation. Jeong-un admitted he had no idea how to circulate energy. Blue responded patiently, guiding him step by step. She explained that Kai circulation was largely a matter of imagination and visualization. If he could picture the flow correctly, his body would respond. Although Blue doubted Jeong-un could succeed without any formal training, she was unaware of his unusual nature. Slowly, he directed the energy to his palm. Once it gathered, he struck a nearby pillar. The impact shattered it and even damaged the wall behind it. Blue was stunned. She had seen countless individuals during her existence, but never one like Jeong-un. Without martial arts training or basic techniques, he had successfully circulated Kai. Jeong-un, realizing the power behind martial arts, understood why it was so glorified. It offered a simple and efficient means to kill. Impressed by the results, Jeong-un pressed to learn the second technique. Blue began to explain but abruptly stopped. She remembered her own pride and decided she had already said too much. Reflecting on the situation, she began to understand why older shamans had always been so obsessed with their disciples. Jeong-un absorbed everything she taught with frightening speed. Jeong-un wanted to ask about the cold sensation he had felt earlier, something different from the warmth of Kai. Blue, however, had lost interest in speaking and walked away. Left alone, he resolved to uncover the answer on his own. Together, they exited the area beneath the medicinal hall, with Jeong-un having gained a great deal from the experience. Elsewhere, the guard named Ang-ho, protector of the First Lady, arrived at the Ghost Shadows Pavilion. She stepped inside, where statues of wooden shamans stood ominously. A torch suddenly ignited as she began speaking aloud. She explained that Shi-Myo, the shaman, had been killed by Jeong-un, who she referred to as the third young master. She placed 300 silver nyang in mourning for the death and offered an additional 400 as payment for a new mission, the elimination of Jeong-un. The torch extinguished, she understood that the request had been accepted and quietly left. Although no one appeared to be present, she had felt dozens of unseen eyes watching her. She would never have entered that place if not for her obligation to carry out the First Lady's will. Inside the pavilion, the leader of the shamans confirmed that Shi-Myo's death had indeed been a murder. The others agreed. Based on information they had gathered, the First Lady's guard had been seen floating, a feat possible only through a yellow spirit's power. The shamans speculated that Jeong-un had been possessed by such a spirit. The leader asked if the yellow spirit could have become a servant spirit. Most dismissed the possibility, stating that a beast of pure spirit could potentially be tamed, but a yellow spirit could not be taken in. The leader concluded that a shaman would be sent to eliminate Jeong-un and guide the vengeful spirit to rest. Every member in the room supported the decision. The following morning, Go-chan yawned, clearly worn from a sleepless night. He complained about running errands for Jeong-un. He had managed to purchase the requested brazier and now asked what purpose it would serve. Jeong-un, without much ceremony, revealed the Mok family's secret manuals. He tore out each page and threw them into the brazier. Flames consumed the ancient knowledge. Go-chan stood frozen, unable to close his mouth, his eyes wide with disbelief. He could not understand what kind of person would do something so outrageous. Jeong-un remained silent, watching the fire consume the last remnants of the Mok family's legacy. Go-chan stood frozen in disbelief, unable to grasp what he had just witnessed. He questioned what kind of person would destroy such valuable manuals. Although the knowledge might be useless to Jeong-un, others could benefit from it. Jeong-un disagreed. That was the exact reason the manuals needed to be destroyed. He intended to ensure that no one else would gain access to the knowledge now etched into his memory. Go-chan attempted to reason with him again, still struggling to comprehend the decision. Jeong-un remained calm and reassured him. The information had already been fully absorbed into his mind. As a final gesture, he suggested delivering one of the manuals to the First Lady in Yeonpyeong. He envisioned them sharing it peacefully, like a family finally aligned in purpose. While Jeong-un carried out his plan, Gam was beginning his morning routine. His movements remained as sharp and precise as they had been during his days as an assassin. His goal was clear: to retire with honor as an elder of the Yeonmok family once Yeonpyeong secured dominance. That morning, another guard approached and informed him that his master was requesting his presence. Shortly afterward, Gam left the hall with a fresh wound across his forehead. Yeonpyeong had not held back his rage. Jo Il-sung, a close subordinate, had disappeared after being sent to investigate Jeong-un's martial capabilities. Gam had personally vouched for Jeong-un's loss of power. Now, everything seemed uncertain. Yeonpyeong demanded immediate results. In a desperate attempt to buy time, Gam offered his right hand as collateral, securing a mere 4 more hours to resolve the issue. Failure would mean death. He began to understand how deeply the situation had spiraled since the appearance of the false Jeong-un. If Jeong-un had truly retained his strength, then the threat was far greater than anticipated. While combing the area, Gam soon spotted Go-chan, who had been tasked with keeping watch on Jeong-un. His presence alone was suspicious. Gam confronted him, his tone sharp and full of mistrust. When he noticed a familiar manual in Go-chan's possession, his fury escalated. Without hesitation, he beat him and dragged him by force through the halls. The door to Jeong-un's room burst open as Gam kicked it wide, flinging Go-chan inside with no concern for subtlety. Jeong-un turned from his seat, his expression composed and unreadable. He welcomed Gam with an air of feigned innocence, as if unaware of the tension filling the room. Guard Gam demanded an explanation. His mood had already soured from the moment he saw Jeong-un again. Jeong-un acted unaware, attempting to play innocent. However, Guard Gam made it clear there was no time for games. He reminded Jeong-un that he had warned him from the beginning: any foolish move would lead to death. With restrained anger, Guard Gam grabbed Jeong-un by the throat and repeated his warning. Jeong-un responded calmly, claiming he did not remember any such condition. The guard pressed further, asking about the second son's missing subordinate. Jeong-un pretended not to know who that was. When questioned directly about harming the guard, he shifted the conversation, stating that Guard Gam himself knew how powerless he had become, especially against an expert martial artist. Guard Gam hesitated. He indeed knew how weak Jeong-un had seemed and how capable the missing subordinate was. Something about the situation felt off. Jeong-un pushed further, suggesting that if someone as powerless as him had truly killed the subordinate, then the man standing before Gam now could not be the real third son. Those were the very words Gam had used to justify his loyalty to Yeonpyeong. The realization struck. Guard Gam drew his blade and prepared to strike. Jeong-un met his gaze with mockery, asking what course he would take now. It was clear that Guard Gam had switched allegiances, and the subordinate had died because of the deception. In a fit of rage, Gam stabbed Jeong-un repeatedly. Eventually, both of them slumped to the ground, momentarily exhausted. While sitting in silence, Guard Gam began to recount his life. He had been an orphan, raised as an assassin, clawing his way into the Mok family's inner ranks. Years of sacrifice had brought him this far, yet everything was now crumbling. Not only had Jeong-un impersonated the third son, he had also eliminated Yeonpyeong's trusted subordinate. Gam realized that killing Jeong-un might be the only way to escape alive. However, a thought crossed his mind. The subordinate was already dead, and there was no undoing that. What remained was the manual he had taken from Go-chan. If he could retrieve the full manual, he might offer it to Yeonpyeong and preserve his own life. Gam turned to Jeong-un and demanded the rest of the manual. Jeong-un claimed ignorance. Gam warned him to provide a real answer or face death. He offered one final chance: surrender the rest of the manual and live, or die in agony. Jeong-un appeared to accept the deal. This gave Gam a sense of power, and he extended his hand, expecting the remaining pages. Instead, Jeong-un placed his own hand in Gam's and declared that he was the manual, having memorized everything. Before Gam could react, Jeong-un gripped his hand tighter and began absorbing his inner energy through the thoughts-shattering 8 techniques. Gam was stunned, struggling to understand what was happening as his strength began to drain. Realizing the danger, Gam attempted to attack. However, Jeong-un had already treated him as a test subject. He expressed a twisted gratitude as Gam continued to weaken. In desperation, Gam slashed and stabbed him again and again. Eventually, Jeong-un lost grip, and Gam kicked him away with brutal force. Though wounded, Gam was exhausted. His left arm had gone numb, the energy in it completely drained. Jeong-un noted that Gam was indeed a first-rate martial artist. However, lacking the strength to overpower him directly, he had to find another method. Gam refused to accept defeat. He warned that such tricks would not work again and charged with lethal intent. Jeong-un responded by summoning the demon mage. The creature grabbed Gam's hand, stopping him instantly. Confused, Gam asked how Jeong-un had managed this. The answer was simple: it was another trick, one of many. With precision, Jeong-un stabbed Gam using immense force, returning both his dagger and inner energy with a final blow. Blood sprayed as Gam stumbled backward. He realized that the strike had landed in a critical spot. If he removed the blade improperly, the bleeding would become fatal. Jeong-un had not only absorbed Gam's energy but had also weaponized the demonic mage's force. At last, Gam understood how foolish he had been. Choosing Jeong-un as a stand-in had cost him everything. Guard Gam had kept a secret weapon prepared, the poison he had fed to Jeong-un in advance. He had crafted it precisely for a situation like this. Recognizing the escalating danger, he attempted to shift the conflict into negotiation. He offered Jeong-un an antidote and money, suggesting that he leave quietly. However, something unexpected occurred. Despite his efforts to circulate his chi, Gam began vomiting blood, his condition rapidly worsening. Confusion turned to panic as he realized the poison was now affecting him. Jeong-un observed the moment calmly, noting that his own injuries were not as severe as they might have seemed. Gam demanded to know what had been done to him. Jeong-un responded with indifference, remarking that the answer was not significant. When Gam had stabbed him earlier, Jeong-un's blood had spilled onto the blade. What Gam failed to anticipate was that Jeong-un's blood was already laced with deadly toxins. Years of consuming poisonous herbs since childhood had transformed it into a potent weapon. Listing the ingredients Gam had used to concoct his own poison, Jeong-un explained that he had no need for the antidote. Realizing the gravity of his mistake, Gam's body began trembling. Jeong-un added that he had opened the window intentionally to lower the room's temperature. A colder body would slow the poison's spread, delaying death. In desperation, Gam pleaded for mercy. He swore loyalty to Jeong-un, offering to serve him, crawl at his feet, and follow any command in exchange for his life. Jeong-un considered the offer, noting that such a submissive attitude could have made them useful allies. Gam's eyes lit with hope at the words. However, Jeong-un dismissed the offer, explaining that loyalty forged out of convenience was meaningless. A man who changed sides to suit his survival could never be trusted. Deciding that Gam was better off dead, Jeong-un plunged a blade into his heart. The act marked Jeong-un's first time killing a first-rate martial artist. There was a thrill to the moment, something dark and cold that lingered within him. He stood and brushed himself off, having ended the fight sooner than expected. Turning his gaze toward Go-chan, Jeong-un considered whether the boy should also die. However, he recalled that Go-chan had never revealed the secret about the manual's destruction, even after being beaten. This loyalty earned Go-chan a reprieve. He called for Go-chan to rise. When Go-chan asked how Jeong-un knew he was awake, Jeong-un explained that he had noticed small movements, likely made in fear of being stepped on during the fight. Appreciating the discretion, Jeong-un commended him for keeping their secret. Go-chan responded with a humble smile. Jeong-un then ordered him to send the others away so he could deal with Gam's body alone. Using the ritual of attachment, Jeong-un focused on the energy within the corpse. Though he felt the lingering warmth of inner energy, it offered him no benefit. What he sought was the chilling force he had sensed beneath the pavilion, the death kai. Once the warmth faded, he began to feel that cold energy again. Unlike the previous type, this one did not scatter. He concluded that to gather more of this death Kai, he would need to kill again. From the side, Blue observed with the demon mage. She commented to the creature that now she understood why it remained bound to Jeong-un. He was no ordinary person. He was something else entirely, a monster. Meanwhile, at the pavilion of Yeonpyeong, guard Yeonkyun reported to him that guard Gam had not lied. Yeonpyeong acknowledged this fact, explaining that people treated kindly from the start often grew entitled. Therefore, he had chosen to be strict. Once he eventually showed mercy, Gam would remain loyal. Yeonpyeong believed cruelty should precede kindness to ensure obedience. The guard now saw the wisdom in his master's methods and understood that this had been a test of loyalty. A new report arrived. A guard informed Yeonpyeong that guard Gam had attempted to kill the third master. More troubling, the third master had publicly declared that Yeonpyeong was behind the assassination attempt. Yeonpyeong froze in shock. His eyes burned with fury as he processed the accusation. Jeong-un had named him during the investigation, claiming that Yeonpyeong had ordered the hit through guard Gam. Guard Yeonkyung demanded to know guard Gam's whereabouts. The responding guard informed him that Gam had vanished after the failed assassination attempt. Enraged, Yeonpyeong unsheathed his sword, preparing to strike down Jeong-un in retaliation. Yeonkyung quickly intervened, warning that acting impulsively would only give more credibility to Jeong-un's testimony. Yeonpyeong initially resisted the advice, concerned that Jeong-un might mock him for showing restraint. However, Yeonkyung urged him to consider a more strategic alternative. Yeonkyung reminded him that Jeong-un had testified during the outer chamber investigation, claiming that guard Gam had attacked him. Rather than retaliate personally, they could exploit the rules of the organization Gam once belonged to. That group, known as the Flying Death School, held strict codes. Regardless of retirement, any assassin who failed a mission faced death as punishment. There were no exceptions. Yeonkyung proposed contacting the organization and relaying the situation to them directly. Yeonpyeong's anger shifted to satisfaction at the mention of the Flying Death School. He saw an opportunity to eliminate Jeong-un without raising suspicion or damaging his reputation further. Elsewhere, inside the Mok family residence, Jeong-un attempted to construct a Kai center using the secret manual's instructions. Although he managed to circulate his internal energy briefly, it would always dissipate before taking hold. Frustrated, he called for Go-chan and described the issue. Go-chan, who had believed Jeong-un to be entirely ignorant of martial arts just the day before, could hardly believe the progress. The notion that Jeong-un had awakened his chi circulation in a single night sounded absurd. Still, he kept his thoughts to himself and offered to examine the flow firsthand. As they sat down, Go-chan politely requested that Jeong-un ignore any awkward reactions from him. The moment Go-chan touched his chi, he was stunned. Jeong-un's meridians were completely clear, without even a trace of blockages or impurities. Such a state could only be achieved through intense, expert training. Go-chan recognized immediately that Jeong-un possessed the natural talent of a prodigy. However, he also sensed something unusual. A cold, disturbing energy nestled deep near the Kai center. Before he could process it further, the flow shattered. Jeong-un demanded an explanation. Go-chan admitted he felt an unfamiliar force near the chi center, one he could not define. Jeong-un theorized that this cold energy might be the problem and began to believe he would never master martial arts. Go-chan clarified that the cold energy seemed to repel the warm flow of life chi. Its nature felt entirely opposite, as though born of death rather than life. Upon hearing this, Jeong-un concluded that the energy resembled death kai. He then declared that he would attempt to circulate his chi in reverse. Go-chan immediately moved to stop him. However, Blue intervened, grabbing his arm and hissing for silence. She knew that Jeong-un was treading on dangerous ground. If a familiar killed their contractor, both would suffer the consequences. However, if the contractor perished through his own actions, the spiritual bond would break without penalty. She whispered to the demon mage that, once free, she would not hesitate to destroy Jeong-un when he crossed into the spirit realm. Meanwhile, within the First Lady's chamber, a shaman from the ghost shadows arrived. Her name was Sak. The First Lady, expecting little, found herself intrigued when the young shaman revealed she had brought the corpse of her junior, Shin Ma. This detail confirmed Sak's higher status. Sak explained that she had come to trace Shin Ma's killer and declared with certainty that the third young master must die. The First Lady, initially skeptical, found herself impressed by Sak's resolve and began to appreciate her presence. The shaman then began her ritual. Shin Mao's eyes and mouth opened, lifeless yet responsive. Sak chanted while stabbing into the body, channeling energy with precision. Suddenly, pale, skeletal hands burst from Shin Mao's mouth and eyes. These limbs moved with singular intent, seeking their target. From afar, Blue felt the surge of energy from the ritual. In an instant, the ghostly hands tore through the manor, smashing into Jeong-un's chamber. Demon Mage moved swiftly, blocking the incoming assault of spectral hands. Despite his strength, the sheer number of them forced him backward. Blue recognized the spell immediately. It was a technique known as reverse spirit, designed to inflict pain on a target by attacking a proxy. In this case, the suffering inflicted on Shin Mao was intended to be mirrored onto Jeong-un. The First Lady watched with a twisted sense of satisfaction. She believed that each stab into Shin Mao's body translated into pain for Jeong-un. However, the actual situation inside the room was far from what she imagined. Blue, unwilling to allow another force to interfere with her chosen prey, reacted decisively. Sensing the interference of a lesser being, she struck back with overwhelming power. In one sweeping blow, she shredded all the spectral hands and instantly located the shaman's position. Without hesitation, she unleashed her fury, tearing through the spiritual links and launching the shaman across the courtyard. The shaman, now bleeding and shaken, realized the ritual had failed. She had underestimated her opponent. Clearly, a spirit stronger than a yellow rank one was present in the room. Sak demanded additional compensation. She claimed the current price did not cover the level of danger she now faced. The First Lady asked for clarification, unsure why more payment was required. Sak calmly stated that she needed at least 1,000 silver niangs for a mission involving a high-ranking evil spirit. The First Lady's guard objected, arguing that 400 silver niangs had already been paid, enough to buy a considerable amount of rice. Sak clarified that confronting such a powerful spirit risked her life. Even yellow spirits posed a threat to human lives, and the force she encountered was far more dangerous. Most shamans could not handle entities above the yellow rank unless they were as skilled as her. The First Lady finally agreed to the new terms. In exchange for the additional payment, Sak was to ensure Jeong-un's death. Shamans, like spirits, were ranked in tiers: Divine Sun, Moon, Talent, Darkness, and Porter, from highest to lowest. Shin Mao had held a lower rank, while Sak was of the Talent rank, 2 levels higher. She was also one of the 3 shamans permitted to control Ime Mangryang's servant spirits within the Ghost Shadows Padova. Confident in her abilities, Sak guaranteed that Jeong-un would not survive. Back inside Jeong-un's room, Blue remained irritated by Sak's interference. If the shaman succeeded, Jeong-un would die at someone else's hand, which could also jeopardize her connection to him. However, she sensed something beyond normal comprehension. Both Death Kai and Life Kai flowed within Jeong-un, an impossibility for a living human. The realization struck her hard. Jeong-un had grasped the ritual of attachment almost instantly. Despite having no formal training in martial arts, he had learned how to circulate his inner energy on his own. Now, he was somehow generating Death Kai while still alive. Though reluctant to admit it, Blue was beginning to develop a grudging admiration for him. Jeong-un stirred awake, clarity settling over him. He now understood how to circulate his energy properly. This time, the chi did not disperse as before. However, he lacked the quantity needed to form a stable energy core. Looking around, he asked about the state of the room and noticed that Demon Mage appeared weakened. More confusing was the sight of Go-chan collapsing on the ground. Blue casually suggested that Go-chan might simply be sleeping. Demon Mage, now fully conscious, quickly explained the real reason for Go-chan's condition. His explanation was cut short when Blue delivered a sharp kick, punishing him for revealing too much to Jeong-un. Their attention quickly shifted when a strange sound echoed from outside. Jeong-un asked for a status update. Blue, now alert, warned him not to lower his guard. Moments later, an overwhelming number of beetles crawled into the room, their movements coordinated and unnatural. Disgust flickered across Blue's face as she identified them. These beetles were not ordinary insects but spiritual entities. She named them Gyo, spirit creatures born from the mountains. Specifically, they were a species of Ime Mangryang spirits native to Yoya Mountain. The mountain-dwelling spirits were known as Ime, while those originating from the sea were called Mangryang. For generations, people referred to destructive spirits causing chaos as Ime Mangryang. One of these fearsome entities was the Gyo. Sak released the Gyo, a creature resembling a bird with the tail of a serpent. It called forth swarms of insects to unleash devastation. The Gyo, with its venomous nature and uncontrollable hunger, posed a deadly threat. Although shamans held no kinship with one another, Sak felt genuine anger over Shin Mayo's death at the hands of a dark spirit. To avenge him, she intended to turn Jeong-un into nothing more than food for her summoned beast. Inside the room, Go-chan slept unaware of the growing danger. Jeong-un slapped him awake, prompting immediate panic as Go-chan opened his eyes to find the room crawling with insects. Jeong-un instructed him to destroy the invaders. However, when Go-chan reached out, even the briefest contact with the insects left his hand foul and crawling with filth. Jeong-un reminded him to reinforce his body with inner energy. Though the bugs were small, their sheer numbers made it clear that it would only take moments before they consumed both of them. Blue, watching from the side, asked what Jeong-un planned to do. Without action, they would both become insect feed. Jeong-un turned to her for help. In response, she questioned what she would gain from assisting him. He reminded her of her place as a servant spirit and wondered why she was resisting. She responded by proposing a wager. If Jeong-un reached the brink of death, she would claim his body. However, if he managed to survive this ordeal, she would offer him her full support going forward. He accepted the terms. With no room left to stand safely, both he and Go-chan rose to their feet, insects flooding the floor around them. Jeong-un devised a plan to ignite the area and kill the bugs using fire. He pointed to a lantern on the table and instructed Go-chan that it could be their only salvation. The problem was the lantern's distance, too far for a safe reach. In response, Jeong-un used the ritual of attachment to pull it toward him. Go-chan, stunned, could not understand how he managed such a feat. Jeong-un began to consider who might be behind the current attack. He concluded it had to be the First Lady, reasoning that the shaman was likely nearby and aligned with her. Setting the place ablaze would create enough confusion to confront and eliminate the summoner. However, before the fire could spread, the shaman arrived. She halted the flames effortlessly. With calm authority, she declared that childish tricks like fire would never work against someone of her level. Her right eye, known as the white eye, allowed her to perceive what others could not. From her vantage, she had already seen through the walls and discerned Jeong-un's intentions. The shaman called upon Gyo, shattering the wall with force, and stepped confidently into the room. Jeong-un welcomed her appearance as an opportunity, though she immediately noticed the red threads that connected him to his servant spirits. Demon Mage was already positioned for an ambush, but before he could strike, she began a chant. Her spell crushed him into the ground, leaving him immobilized. She stepped on his back without hesitation, claiming she could easily identify his form. Go-chan lunged forward without fear, refusing to retreat. Despite her being a shaman of talent rank, he did not hesitate. Yet the shaman unleashed another curse. Its force blasted Go-chan across the room, and the knife he carried slipped from his grip. The blade spun through the air toward Jeong-un, who caught it cleanly. The shaman issued a command to Gyo. Immediately, the insects swarmed toward Jeong-un with renewed hunger. He stumbled back as they surged forward, threatening to overwhelm him. She coldly announced that he should prepare to cross into the spirit realm, for death was imminent. The bugs closed in completely, surrounding Jeong-un in a thick, writhing mass. Within seconds, his figure vanished from sight beneath the tide of crawling bodies. Everyone present had fallen under the shaman's spell, left immobilized without resistance. Initially, the shaman believed she was dealing with a high-level evil spirit. However, she dismissed the idea as nothing more than her imagination. With Gyo returning to her side, she praised it for its efforts, considering their mission complete. Together, they prepared to leave, although the shaman still felt the commission had been insufficient. Just as she turned to go, an unsettling chill passed through her. Jeong-un, who had appeared completely subdued, suddenly stood up. Blood began flowing as he stabbed himself deliberately, letting it pour freely. The shaman turned in disbelief while Jeong-un splashed his poisoned blood over his own body and onto the surrounding insects. The bugs, unable to withstand the toxicity, withered and died instantly. Horrified, the shaman watched as Jeong-un drove a spike into his own palm and poured the streaming blood over his head. His blood, long infused with poison, acted as a lethal pesticide. The scene before her was terrifying. Jeong-un no longer resembled a human being. His presence now resembled that of a demon rising from the depths of hell. The shaman instinctively stepped back as he advanced, declaring his blood was not only deadly but useful as a weapon. Panicked, the shaman ordered Gyo to buy time while she prepared a stronger spell. She immediately began casting one of the 8 techniques. In response, Jeong-un activated the ritual of attachment, pulling Gyo directly into his grasp. The shaman froze in shock while Jeong-un calmly remarked on the newfound silence. She turned to flee, only to be overwhelmed by a piercing sensation. The pain she felt was not her own but came through the bond she shared with Gyo. At that moment, she realized Jeong-un was absorbing death Kai directly from Gyo. This was something no living person should have been capable of. The amount of death Kai within the spirit exceeded anything found in a dying human, enough to form a complete energy core. The shaman begged him to stop, pleading that any further drain would kill the spirit. She was helpless as the very energy that made her craft possible slipped from her grasp. Meanwhile, at the residence of the First Lady, her guard suggested moving inside due to the cold, yet she refused. With the situation still uncertain, she chose to remain outdoors. She had made 2 specific requests to the ghost shadows. One was Jeong-un's death while the other was the acquisition of the secret manuals to prevent others from obtaining them. The guard reported that the shaman was returning, and there was already a growing belief that the mission had succeeded. Many assumed Jeong-un was dead. The First Lady began to imagine the manuals falling into her hands and her son finally ascending as the new head of the Mok family. Her maids offered early congratulations, but she quickly silenced them, not yet ready to celebrate. The shaman came into view, though she stopped abruptly before reaching the residence. The First Lady demanded an explanation. In response, the shaman, now visibly conflicted, delivered a message that stunned everyone. The ghost shadows, despite their efforts, had failed to eliminate the 3rd young master. The shaman, still shaken, reflected on the cruelty of Jeong-un, who had forced her into this position. Earlier, Jeong-un had confronted her with a final command. To protect Gyo, she had to speak out herself and declare the First Lady responsible for the assassination attempt. He predicted that even if Sak was defeated, the ghost shadows would continue sending agents. By turning them against the First Lady, he could disrupt their alliance. It was a strategic move meant to dismantle their cooperation. Now, returning to the present, the shaman publicly declared that the First Lady had ordered the ghost shadows to kill the 3rd young master, claiming he was possessed by a mystical being. However, after thorough examination, no such possession had been found. She urged the First Lady never to request such a task from the ghost shadows again. The crowd began murmuring, eyes turning toward the First Lady. Whispers spread rapidly. The head guard issued an order to head immediately to her residence. Her guard informed her that officials from the outer chamber were approaching quickly. The First Lady stood frozen. Fear overwhelmed her as the consequences of her schemes closed in. She could neither move nor speak, gripped entirely by the weight of her failure. Sak entered the 3rd master's residence, where Jeong-un calmly asked if she had done as instructed. She confirmed the mission was completed. In her mind, she acknowledged that everything had unfolded according to Jeong-un's plan. Now, the First Lady and the Ghost Shadow's Pagoda were at odds. The First Lady had become a villain in the public eye for attempting to murder the 3rd son. However, the Ghost Shadows had little concern for her situation. What mattered more was that the shaman had betrayed the Ghost Shadows to protect her spirit. That betrayal meant the Ghost Shadows would never stop pursuing her. She requested that Jeong-un return her spirit. Before answering, he asked her about the Ime Mangryang and the people capable of controlling the spirits. While holding the bird-headed spirit in one hand and the demon mage by his side, Jeong-un pressed for more details. The shaman realized he had never been possessed. She was further astonished by the demon mage, a resentful spirit bound as a servant. It was rare, nearly impossible, for someone to tame such a spirit, yet Jeong-un had done so. On top of that, he had another servant spirit. When he asked if she would answer or not, the shaman began to explain. The Ime Mangryang were divided into 6 ranks: cursed, paranormal, impish, demonic, eternal, and divine. A cursed spirit was considered a small-scale disaster. The higher the rank, the more devastating the entity. Within the Ghost Shadows, only 3 people, including herself, had the ability to command such beings. One of them was Go, an aide to the family head, who controlled a paranormal spirit from Nogo Mountain named Gojo. Although she didn't know the full extent of that spirit's power, she acknowledged its danger. The third was the master of the Ghost Shadows. While she had no idea what type of Ime Mangryang he commanded, she believed it to be of an even higher grade. Jeong-un speculated that it must be either a sacred or divine beast. The shaman disagreed. Beasts of those ranks only existed in ancient legends. Very few stories spoke of people binding sacred beasts as servant spirits. She then handed him a book containing everything she knew about the Ime Mangryang. Jeong-un contemplated how much death Kai a higher-ranked spirit would possess, considering even a lesser mountain-piercing beast had given him enough to form an energy core. He thanked the shaman for the book and returned her spirit. When she failed to express gratitude, he prompted her to say it properly. She complied, and he allowed her to leave. Go-chan, who had been observing everything, found Jeong-un's behavior irritating. Once the shaman was gone, Jeong-un reflected on his fortune. With the First Lady under scrutiny from the outer hall and the amount of death Kai he had acquired, no one could touch him. At last, he would be able to cultivate martial arts properly. Go-chan asked whether it was wise to let the shaman leave, given that she might hold a grudge. Jeong-un replied that a promise must be honored. When Go-chan pushed the issue further, Jeong-un agreed that the shaman might seek revenge. He then turned to Blue and reminded her of the promise she made earlier. Meanwhile, the shaman wandered through the mountain, still stunned that her spirit had survived after losing nearly all its death Kai. Her thoughts quickly shifted to revenge. Suddenly, Blue's voice echoed through the air, warning her that seeking revenge was unwise. The shaman immediately recognized the presence. It was the same feeling she had experienced during the reverse murder spell. She recoiled in fear. The realization that someone had bound a blue spirit as a servant was overwhelming. Blue materialized upside down in front of her and took one of her eyes. With eerie calmness, Blue remarked that she still looked beautiful, even with one eye missing. Moments later, Blue ended the life of the talent-ranked shaman. At the residence of the First Lady, chaos was escalating. She pounded her desk in frustration while pleading her case to Sir Sang of the Outer Hall. She claimed Jeong-un and the shaman had conspired to frame her. Sir Sang dismissed her accusations and asked about the incident she caused at the medicinal hall. She insisted it stemmed from Jeong-un entering Lord Mok's chamber against her instructions. Sir Sang interrupted and explained that Jeong-un had done so to save Lord Mok's life. He then questioned whether she had tried to kill Lord Mok herself. Despite her shouting, Sir Sang remained composed and stated that he would not ignore the incident. A full investigation would follow, covering her, Yeonpyeong, and Jeong-un. After she left, Sir Sang remained deep in thought. He couldn't understand the motive behind the attacks. It would have made more sense if they had targeted the fourth son, who was Lord Mok's favorite. Jeong-un had no outstanding achievements, no lineage advantage, and no martial skill. Despite this, the attempts on his life continued. Sir Sang noted that Jeong-un had changed. Once arrogant to anyone who showed deference, he now carried himself differently. Determined to uncover the truth, Sir Sang resolved to investigate Jeong-un personally.